today we have a special guest joining us from the Cato Institute's Director of Tax Policy Studies, Chris Edwards. He holds an MA in Economics from George Mason University in Virginia. His recent book, Global Tax Revolution, The Rise of Tax Competition and a Battle to Defend It, is a good read. I recommend you picking it up from the Cato bookstore online. Also, he had a book out called Downsizing the Federal Government that John McCain was reading all during the election. Too bad we won't be really implementing any of that anytime soon. But let's just get right into this discussion on the stimulus package and the current economy. Mr. Edwards, how are you doing, sir?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Well, I just wanted to jump right in because last night, as a taxpayer myself, I'm looking at the numbers. And for me, when I'm looking at the numbers, I see the Obama administration's promise of 3 million jobs at a price of $825 billion stimulus package. I mean, that's, even if it works, that's about $280,000 per job. I don't see how he's able to sell this at all, even to the Democrats. And moreover, doesn't it look like that most of the stimulus package, a lot of it's going to areas where unemployment is actually surprisingly low, and it might not help compared to other areas?
You raised lots of good points. I mean, really, it's only half the country that is hurting, and it's really only half the state governments like California that are in big trouble. I mean, other states like Texas are actually doing okay. The creation of 3 million jobs comes straight out of a 1960s era Keynesian economics textbook. Many macro, perhaps most macro economists don't believe that sort of simplistic Keynesianism anymore. If the government is borrowing $800 billion to create a few million jobs, then it is also destroying a million jobs that you don't see because the government is sucking that money out of the private economy somewhere else. So, government operates on this weird principle that, all the policymakers, they focus only on the visible things that they can see, the jobs that they create, but they never consider the invisible jobs that they destroy by all their spending.
Right. When you look at the long-term costs, there's also the Republican plans. They had a lot of promises. Obama said, look, we have tax cuts in this to appeal to Republicans, while the Republicans said their plan kind of focused on tax cuts for smaller businesses. Yet, I mean, I think a lot of people would worry that even these tax cuts aren't going to be put back into the market. They're just going to be used for savings. I mean, there's not a single plan out there really for long-term tax reform from any politician right now, is there?
You raise a good point. I'm against both the spending in this package and the temporary tax cuts. I don't think the temporary tax cuts do any good. All they do is they try to sort of manipulate businesses into, let's say, businesses were planning to invest a few years down the road, then they might move some of that future investment forward to this year, but on net, you're not getting any additional investment. So rather than trying to manipulate markets like that, I think you're right. We should be focusing on long-term growth. It's like, we can bail out the automobile companies in the short run. In the long run, we're only going to have an automobile industry in this country if we get our corporate tax rate down, we reform some of our regulations, because all of those cars can be made in China and Canada and Mexico these days. So we need to focus on long-run competitiveness.
Well, on that issue of long-run competitiveness, isn't it essential, though, that we reinvest in the crumbling infrastructure of the country? I mean, we've seen things from the Minneapolis Bridge to the botched response of FEMA to Hurricane Katrina. Isn't revitalizing our highways, revitalizing infrastructure, isn't that something that pretty much everybody of all political stripes can get behind?
Of course, infrastructure is crucially important, but, there's a big question about how do you finance it. In a lot of places in the world, financing has gone private. In places like Virginia and in Indiana, they're building private toll highways. They've also done so in Texas. Why not allow the private sector to get into the financing of some of this infrastructure? Many of the major airports in Europe are privately owned and operated. Why not privatize the state and local airports in this country? Let's get the private sector involved here and work their magic.
But then again, also, James, infrastructure usually takes the longest time to see any effects in the economy, and if you look at it, only a fifth of the original $550 billion is really left for infrastructure. So, you're from Boston, so we have the Big Dig, infamous Big Dig, where government, there's always delay of time with these infrastructure projects. But this...
Yeah, then that's a lot of time. That was started in the early 80s. They promised it would only cost $3 billion. It ended up costing $16 billion, as you know. And that, of course, is one of the big problems with government infrastructures. It's so inefficient.
You raised a point earlier about, this is there's a rise of new Keynesianism again after all these, years. In the last 60 years, America's experienced the the detrimental consequences of inflation from Keynesian policies. I'm just curious because with all the information, all the data is on new multipliers and things like that, and how much government spending will actually help the economy in growing. I just wonder, why is there just this pro sentiment for Keynesianism, and it's even with the Republicans. I mean, my heart sank, although I don't never put that much faith in George Bush anyways, when he said, I am saving the free market by abandoning free market principles, and he backs the original bailout. Is there any hope?
But I know that it's weird. It's like the Keynesian language of giving the economy a booster shot, is what Bush called it in the stimulus package last February. For some reason, the Keynesian language is very. Politicians seem to like it. I mean, politicians, of course, they love spending money, and because they can reward their special interest constituencies. So. I think that there is this huge gulf now between what the serious university macroeconomists, understand now about Keynesianism and the view on Capitol Hill, which is much different.
Isn't there a valid point though behind some of this? Because firstly want to agree on the first ballot. In my opinion, if you have these companies that, for so long have donated to right-wing think tanks and causes saying that the free market's this great idea, let them fail by their own philosophy, was sort of my initial take.
Sure.
But it seems that there's a problem now where you can't let it could cause a cascade if all the banks fail and all the financial institutions fail.
I don't really buy that, because it's widely known now which the sound financial companies were and which were very shaky. So if people started pulling their money out of the shaky institutions, where would they put it? They'd put it into the secure institutions and make them even more secure. So banks like J.P. Morgan and SunTrust were much better managed. Why not let the poorly managed financial institutions fail? The money would flow to the better managed institutions to make them even more sound, it seems to me.
Right. I mean, one of the things I worry is that by government kind of trumping up all this funds, trying to get it back to sustainable levels as it was 2 years ago, this creates kind of a false illusion to the consumers and to American citizens that you're in a better shape than you think. And there's really no fiscal responsibility, on the part of the citizen himself.
Right, and this is what recessions are about: the economy restructuring. And there was a housing bubble. At the end of the 90s, there was a tech bubble. Those crashed. The private economy has to work out these. They have to work out and restructure themselves, and then move on. And they can only start growing again when they restructure and they find new equilibrium. So, if you look at, say, the two retail companies, Best Buy and Circuit City was poorly managed. So it's a good thing that Circuit City is now bankrupt and going out of business, because Best Buy was better managed, and so it'll be hopefully the better managed companies then that are in a good position to grow in the years ahead.
But isn't there another point though where you claim that this is just going to be a very short recession? But even Alan Greenspan, the forefather really of modern Reaganomics to some extent, has said this is the worst global crisis we've seen in this century, since the 1900s.
Yeah, I have no idea whether this is going to be a long or short recession, and frankly, I put very little credence into short-term economic forecasts. I think we've seen over the last year that a lot of smart PhD economists in Washington really have no idea what they're doing. Look at the way the Treasury Department, with all its brains over there, keeps changing direction on the financial bailout. So I think when the government doesn't really know what it's doing, it ought to keep its hands off and let the market restructure and grow by itself.